Story 1. A creepy voice looking for Caroline. In the middle of summer, my boyfriend John and I decided to take a long weekend. We were craving adventure and the great outdoors. What happened instead was one of the creepiest experiences either of us have ever been through. Had I not been there myself, I wouldn't have believed that it happened. A weekend in the Appalachian Mountains seemed like the perfect escape. I managed to find a quaint cabin on Airbnb that promised to be both secluded and picturesque. We were only the third or fourth people to book it since it was newly listed. The cabin lived up to its promise. It was surrounded by a dense expanse of trees with a spectacular view of the mountains. Every corner was meticulously designed, blending modern comfort with a rustic touch. However, what really caught my attention was an old radio on a side table in the living room. It felt out of place, but in an oddly charming way. Its wooden exterior, worn-out knobs, and a big speaker at the center gave the cabin a touch of vintage elegance. On our second morning there, while we were fixing breakfast, the radio abruptly blared to life, filling the room with loud static. We froze, startled by the sudden noise. As we approached it, I could faintly make out a voice. All I could make out, though, was the name Caroline. John quickly switched it off, attributing the unexpected turn-on to faulty wiring. That evening, we relaxed on the balcony with our drinks. The chirping of crickets and distant owl hoots was therapeutic, but the tranquility was shattered when, once again, the radio spontaneously turned on. Static, a voice, and then the word Caroline. It was more distinct this time, and eerie. Feeling a mix of curiosity and unease, we discussed the bizarre occurrences. Deciding we didn't want to be interrupted by the radio again, John unplugged it, and I stowed it away in a closet. The following morning, I recounted the eerie radio incidents to our Airbnb host over a call. She sounded genuinely surprised, mentioning that no previous guests had reported anything unusual. "Just keep it in the closet. It's probably just old and acting up," she said. Taking her advice, we unplugged the radio, placed it in the closet, and went about our day. It was the perfect day. We hiked trails and relaxed by a nearby river. With the sun shining, birds singing, and nature surrounding us, the radio was soon forgotten. However, our peace was rudely interrupted that night. Just as we were drifting to sleep, the radio blared loudly from the closet, the noise startling and ear-piercing. John, a touch of fear in his eyes, approached the closet. But just as he was about to open the door, the radio fell silent. Pulling the door open, he discovered the unplugged radio sitting innocently on the shelf. We both looked at each other, wide-eyed, creeped out, and confused. Not knowing what else to do, John carried the radio outside and locked it in the trunk of our car. It was a mostly sleepless night, but the silence remained unbroken. The next morning, although it was our last day, we couldn't shake off the unease. We decided to cut our stay short by a few hours. John retrieved the radio, placing it back inside the cabin, and we headed home, eager to put the unsettling experience behind us. About a month later, I received a call from the Airbnb host. She wanted to share something interesting that she had found. A recent guest had stumbled upon an old headstone while hiking in the woods near the cabin. The grave, dated back to the 1930s, had the name Caroline on it. The host dove deep into some research. She uncovered the tragic story of Caroline, a 9-year-old girl who vanished in the 1930s. Her disappearance and the discovery of her lifeless body happened over a 2-day period, eerily corresponding with the 2 days the radio had acted up during our stay. It was believed she was abducted and cruelly murdered. The realization made my skin crawl. To this day, John and I can't shake off that eerie radio that seemed to come to life on the same days as this poor girl that went missing. Some things, I guess, will never be explained.
Story 2. The Uninvited Guest. I had been driving for hours, eager to get away from the city noise and spend a weekend alone in a remote cabin. The stresses of my day-to-day job had been taking a toll on me, and I needed a break. I had found a cabin on Airbnb that seemed perfect, secluded, surrounded by woods, and with an amazing view of a serene lake. The reviews were all positive, with guests praising the quiet beauty of the place. When I arrived, the sun was setting. The cabin was amazing, made of dark timber with large windows that allowed a beautiful view of the surroundings. After unloading my stuff and making a quick dinner, I settled in the living area with a book. The darkness outside enveloped the cabin quickly, but as the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to the unfamiliarity of the woods and the innate fear of the unknown that many of us have. After all, I was alone in a remote area. When I decided to turn in for the night, I made sure all the windows and doors were locked. My room had a large window facing the dense woods. Lying in bed, the eeriness of the silence felt profound. The earlier peace I felt was replaced by an unsettling quiet. Somewhere around 1 a.m., a creak in the floorboard of the front porch jolted me awake. At first, I thought it was just an animal or something, but as I listened closely, it sounded more like footsteps. Trying not to panic, I sat up, straining my ears to pinpoint the source. The sound grew louder, and I could now clearly hear footsteps approaching the front door. Every so often they would stop, and a heavy silence would take over, only to be interrupted again by the steps. I dared not move, afraid to make any noise. The only source of light was the dim moonlight filtering through the windows. Suddenly, a shadow peeked around the corner of the window in the door. I was paralyzed by fear. The silhouette seemed to be of a tall man, but the features were indistinguishable. He pressed his face against the window, and I could see his breath fogging it up. His eyes were wide open, devoid of any emotion, staring directly at me. Our eyes locked, and though he made no move to enter or break down the door, the mere intensity of his gaze made my blood run cold. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, he pulled away from the window and the sound of his footsteps slowly faded into the distance. I stayed frozen in my bed, too terrified to move. When dawn finally broke, the terror of the night gave way to the beautiful serenity of the morning. Gathering my courage, I decided to inspect the perimeter of the cabin. My heart sank when I saw the multiple sets of footprints, confirming what I already knew. Rushing inside, I immediately called the local police. They arrived within the hour, and I relayed the entire ordeal to them. They conducted a thorough search of the surrounding woods but didn't find anybody. However, they did find a campsite on the other side of the hill, not far from the cabin, which seemed to have been recent, but abandoned now. Not feeling completely safe anymore, I cut my trip short. I informed my Airbnb host of the incident, and they promised to look into the matter. I often wonder what would have happened if that creepy man had decided to do more than just watch that night. I've honestly never been so scared before in my life. It's a very unsettling feeling of knowing that you're being watched, and not knowing the intent of the person watching you. It's been a while since I've rented another Airbnb. I haven't sworn them off altogether, but I do believe my next rental won't be so isolated and remote. Story 3. We spent the night with a presence. Late last fall, my wife and I decided to take a few days off to go visit my parents. Rather than flying, we decided to make a trip of it and drive, taking our cat Sam along with us. We would leave on a Friday afternoon, stay the night in an Airbnb, and then make the rest of the trip Saturday morning. We booked 2 different Airbnbs, one for the trip down and another for the trip back. Our first Airbnb was at a somewhat remote cottage, into the woods a little bit but not too far off from our path. A nice private getaway for the night, we thought. We arrived around sunset and the house was dark. As we parked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of being watched. As we stepped inside, it felt like we had interrupted someone, even though all the lights were off. My wife whispered, "Feels like we're not alone, doesn't it?" I nodded, feeling relieved that I wasn't the only one with that sensation. Sam immediately hid behind the couch, his tail puffed up, which was really weird. Walking through the cottage, we confirmed there was no one else present. We decided to shake off our unease and settle in for the evening. After a light meal and some wine, we decided to head to bed. Choosing a bedroom was odd. The first one we entered was ice cold, which was strange because the rest of the house was comfortably warm. We opted for a different room. Sam was quite uneasy. He kept staring at the door and occasionally hissing. Trying to reassure ourselves, we joked that maybe he saw a ghost. The eeriness intensified around 3 a.m. I was jolted awake by a creaking noise. My wife, still half asleep, mumbled, "Did you hear that?" As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I swear I saw the door to the bedroom slowly move. Sam hissed violently, his eyes fixated on it. Panicking, I reached for my phone's flashlight. As I did, my wife grabbed my arm. "I swear I just saw someone standing by the door in the hall." I got up and carefully checked, but found nothing. We were honestly so creeped out that we thought of leaving, but it was pitch black outside. Plus, we weren't sure if we were overreacting. To calm our nerves, we decided to chat with the presence. It may sound strange, but it felt like the right thing to do. "Hello," I began, trying not to sound fearful. "We're just visitors here. We mean no harm. If there's someone here, know that we respect you and your home. We'll be leaving tomorrow morning. Please, let's coexist peacefully." My wife chuckled nervously. "Yeah, please don't scare Sam or us. We just need one night." To our surprise, after our impromptu conversation, the ambiance felt lighter. The unsettling presence seemed to diminish, and even Sam curled up and relaxed. The next morning, as we were prepping to leave, we discussed the previous night. We both agreed that we had sensed something, but after our chat, it felt like an understanding had been reached. However, we were curious. I decided to message the Airbnb host, inquiring subtly if any past guests had shared similar experiences. The reply was swift. "Never heard of anything like that. Hope you had a comfortable stay nonetheless." Although her response was nonchalant, it didn't sit well with me. I wondered if she knew more but was reluctant to share. We wrapped up our stay, ensuring we left the cottage exactly as we had found it. We didn't include our eerie experience in the Airbnb review. After all, how do you tell someone their property might have an unseen guest without sounding crazy? But the experience stayed with us. And oddly enough, both my wife and I have spoken about possibly revisiting the cottage. Although freaked out, we both left there with a sense of excitement and adventure. Maybe next time, we'll get more answers. Thanks for tuning into another episode from the Alley of Nightmares. If you enjoyed the video, please like it, subscribe, and share with all your friends. Until next time,